Dinner on a pirate ship could look almost normal at first. A pot over a fire, men sitting together, something resembling a meal. And then, slowly, it stopped being food at all. From salted meat to infested biscuits to things no one would have considered food on land. Rats caught below deck. Leather softened just enough to chew. Not because anyone wanted to eat it, but because sometimes the alternative was nothing at all. Most pirates didn't feast, but they didn't always starve either. They moved between moments of plenty and stretches where what they ate barely qualified as food. Managing, adjusting, lowering the bar again and again until the bar disappeared. But that's not where it begins. It begins with what counted as a good day. Salmagundi. On a good day, you might get salmagundi. On land, it was something close to refined. A deliberate mix of meats, pickled vegetables, eggs, oil, and spices. A dish with actual intention behind it. At sea, that idea changed. But it didn't disappear entirely. Pirates combined whatever they had into a single dish: salted meat, fish, oil, vinegar, sometimes even herbs or preserved vegetables. When supplies allowed it, there was still some care behind it. Some sense that eating could be more than just survival. But over time, that balance became harder to maintain. Fresh elements disappeared first. What remained became simpler, rougher, more repetitive. Hardtack. Most days were simpler than that. Hardtack was the real constant. Dry biscuits baked so thoroughly that they could last for years. Not made to taste good, only to endure. The Royal Navy issued them as standard rations well into the 19th century, and pirates, who largely lived off raided supply ships, inherited the same cheerless tradition. Eating them straight was difficult, so most sailors softened them first in water, broth, or whatever alcohol was available. That helped, but it didn't solve the bigger problem. By the time you'd been at sea for a few weeks, hardtack was almost always infested. Small beetles and larvae burrowed deep into the biscuit. Some sailors knocked a few loose before eating. Others ate in the dark so they wouldn't have to see what was moving. Most eventually stopped bothering either way. Salt meat. The meat didn't offer much relief. Beef or pork preserved in salt could last a long time, but it came at a cost. The texture was tough. Sailors reportedly used old salt beef to carve buttons and small figurines during long voyages. The stuff was practically wood. The taste was overwhelmingly salty, and by the end of a long voyage, it could start to spoil regardless. Sometimes it was soaked overnight to draw out some of the salt and make it more bearable. Sometimes it wasn't. Either way, it remained a staple. Not because it was good, but because it lasted. Rum and water. Water was an even bigger problem. Stored in wooden barrels under tropical heat, it didn't take long before it started to turn. Stagnant, foul, and sometimes visibly contaminated within weeks. So sailors adapted. They mixed it with rum, not to make it safe, but to make it tolerable. The alcohol masked the taste and helped stretch the rations. Sometimes sugar or citrus was added if available. One exception worth noting: Bartholomew Roberts, Black Bart, one of the most successful pirates in recorded history, responsible for capturing over 400 ships. He reportedly refused rum entirely and drank tea instead. On a ship full of men drinking to survive the water, that made him a genuine oddity. At some point, even bad food runs out, and when it does, something shifts. Not all at once, but gradually, quietly, the way desperation usually works. Rats. Rats were always part of life on a ship. They got into supplies, chewed through rope, nested in the cargo. At first, a nuisance. Something to be managed and thrown overboard when caught. But when supplies ran low, that line could shift. First-hand accounts from stranded and becalmed ships describe men calling them delicate, that word appearing in records of starvation. A small act of dignity, a way of framing the unbearable as something chosen rather than endured. It wasn't everyday practice, but in difficult moments it happened. A small, desperate extension of what counted as food. Leather. If conditions worsened further, the line moved again. Belts, straps, harnesses, pieces of rigging equipment, soaked in water for days, beaten against hard surfaces to break down the fibers, boiled, sometimes roasted, just to make them manageable. The most documented case comes from Magellan's circumnavigation in 1519 to 1522. His crew, stranded in the Pacific for nearly 98 days without sighting land, cut the leather sleeves from the ship's yardarms and prepared them exactly this way. Recorded firsthand by the expedition's chronicler Antonio Pigafetta, who was there. Almost no nutrition, but something to process, something that felt, for a few hours, like not starving. Dog meat. And in the most extreme situations, rare, but documented, even animals on board were seen differently. Dogs were companions, not provisions, but in severe desperation, that distinction could break down. Every part used, meat, organs, bones cracked and boiled for hours to make a thin broth with barely any nutritional value, but warm and tasting of something, and enough to keep a man going one more day. There is little evidence this was common among pirates specifically, but in conditions of real starvation at sea and on land alike, people have made the same choice. It wasn't routine, it was the last resort before nothing. Every so often, the pattern broke. Fresh bread. After a successful raid or a recent stop in port, something different could appear. Fresh bread, not much and never for long, but enough to remind people what food was supposed to feel like. Soft, easy to tear apart, no soaking required, no hidden surprises inside. After weeks of hardtack, that alone was enough to make a grown man quiet for a moment, not out of sadness, but out of something closer to relief. For a short while, eating wasn't a task. It was just eating. Boucanned meat. A successful raid could change everything, at least temporarily. Fresh livestock meant real food again. Meat cooked and smoked over open fire using a method the early Caribbean pirates adopted directly from indigenous Arawak people. They called the wooden smoking frame a boucan. It's where the word buccaneer comes from. For a short time, there was something close to abundance. Fire, meat, the smell of something actually good, men eating until they physically couldn't. Citrus. And then there was citrus. Limes, lemons, oranges. Small, easily overlooked, but quietly extraordinary. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, was one of the greatest killers of the Age of Sail, responsible for more deaths than storms, battles, and shipwrecks combined. Vasco da Gama lost over half his crew to it on his voyage to India in 1497. The remedy existed, but no one yet understood why it worked, and it wasn't always available when it was needed. It wasn't until 1747 that Scottish naval surgeon James Lind formally proved the connection, one of the first controlled clinical trials in medical history. This is the part pirate stories leave out. Not the battles, not the treasure, but the constant uncertainty and the way it slowly reshaped what people were willing to eat. Standards didn't collapse all at once. They shifted, depending on how long the supplies lasted, how far from land you were, and whether the last raid had gone well or badly. And at some point, the question stopped being hypothetical. Not because it always came to that, but because it could. The rat or the leather? Because under the wrong conditions, one of them might be the only thing left, and one of them actually has nutrients.